The courtroom doors explode open with military precision, causing every head to turn as a woman in pristine navy dress whites strides through. Her silver eagle insignia catches the fluorescent light as she surveys the chaotic scene before her, a black woman in handcuffs being forcibly restrained by 3 bailiffs while Judge Harrison Whitfield pounds his gavel furiously. "Order! I will have order in my courtroom," the judge shouts, his face red with indignation. Officer Brett Caldwell, who moments earlier had been smirking about his easy arrest, suddenly goes pale as the woman in uniform approaches the defense table with unwavering authority. "Lieutenant Commander Baptiste," the newcomer says, her voice cutting through the courtroom noise like a blade. Every conversation stops. Even Judge Whitfield's gavel freezes mid-swing. Zara Phoenix Baptiste looks up from where she's been forced to her knees, relief flooding her battered face despite the zip-tie restraints cutting into her wrists. "Admiral Blackstone, I didn't expect you never question the chain of command." Admiral Cassandra Blackstone interrupts, her steel-grey eyes scanning the room before settling on the judge. "Your Honor, I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding regarding one of my Navy SEALs." The realization ripples through the courtroom like a shockwave. They've just arrested one of America's most elite warriors. 4 hours earlier, Lieutenant Commander Zara Phoenix Baptiste sat in the witness waiting room at Richmond Heights Circuit Court, reviewing her testimony notes one final time. At 32, she was one of only a handful of women to have earned the Navy SEAL Trident, and today she was testifying as a character witness for Sergeant First Class Malik Washington, a fellow veteran facing wrongful termination charges. Zara had served 3 combat tours in Syria and Afghanistan, leading direct action missions that saved countless American lives. Her service record included a Silver Star, 3 Bronze Stars with V device, and the respect of every warrior who had served alongside her. But today, she wasn't here as a Navy SEAL. She was here as a friend, supporting a brother-in-arms who needed someone to vouch for his character. Malik had been fired from his security job after his supervisor discovered his PTSD diagnosis. Despite exemplary performance reviews and no incidents on the job, the company claimed he posed a potential risk to workplace safety. It was discrimination, plain and simple, and Zara had volunteered to testify about Malik's integrity and reliability during their shared deployment. She wore her service dress blue uniform, not to intimidate anyone, but because the court appearance was official business and regulations required appropriate attire. The ribbons on her chest told the story of her service, though she hoped most people in the courtroom would focus on her words rather than her decorations. The waiting room was typical of most government buildings. Uncomfortable chairs, fluorescent lighting, and the persistent smell of industrial cleaning supplies mixed with anxiety. Other witnesses sat nearby, some reviewing documents, others staring at their phones, or simply waiting nervously for their cases to be called. Zara had testified in military courts before, but civilian proceedings were different. The rules were less rigid, but the stakes could be just as high for the people involved. For Malik, this wasn't just about getting his job back. It was about establishing a precedent that veterans with service-connected disabilities couldn't be discriminated against simply for seeking the help they needed. At 1400 hours, 2 p.m., in civilian time, a bailiff called her name. Chuck Morrison was a thick-set man in his 40s who moved with the deliberate pace of someone who had been doing the same job for decades. He barely glanced at her as he gestured toward the courtroom doors. "You're up, ma'am. Judge Whitfield is ready for the Washington case." Zara gathered her notes and followed Morrison into the courtroom, unaware that Judge Harrison Whitfield had already made up his mind about the case before hearing a single word of testimony. She also didn't know that Officer Brett Caldwell was positioned near the back of the courtroom, supposedly for security, but actually because he enjoyed watching what he called entitled military types get taken down a peg. As she walked toward the witness stand, Zara felt confident and prepared. She had truth on her side, a compelling story to tell, and the credibility that came from honorable service to her country. What she didn't anticipate was how quickly that service could be turned into a weapon against her by people who saw her uniform as a threat rather than a symbol of sacrifice. The courtroom was moderately full, with Malik's family in the front row and various legal observers scattered throughout the gallery. Everything appeared normal, professional, and orderly. Within the next hour, that impression would be shattered completely. Judge Harrison Whitfield had been on the bench for 15 years, and in that time he had developed strong opinions about military personnel who brought their attitude into his courtroom. At 61, he represented the old guard of the legal system, white male, and convinced that respect was something you demanded rather than earned. When Zara approached the witness stand, Whitfield immediately noted her military bearing and the impressive array of ribbons on her uniform. Rather than being impressed by her obvious service record, he felt challenged by her confident demeanor and professional appearance. "State your name and occupation for the record," Whitfield instructed, his tone already carrying an edge of hostility. "Lieutenant Commander Zara Baptiste, United States Navy, currently assigned to Naval Special Warfare Development Group," she replied clearly and professionally. Malik's attorney, a young public defender named Sarah Martinez, began her questioning. "Commander Baptiste, how long have you known the plaintiff, Malik Washington?" "I've known Sergeant Washington for 4 years. We served together during Operation Inherent Resolve in Syria from 2019 to 2020. As Zara began describing Malik's exemplary conduct under fire, his reliability in high-stress situations, and his dedication to his fellow service members, Judge Whitfield grew increasingly irritated. Her calm professionalism seemed to grate on him, and her obvious competence appeared to challenge his preconceptions about military personnel. "Commander Baptiste," Whitfield interrupted, "are you here to testify about the plaintiff's job performance, or to impress this court with your own military credentials?" The question was inappropriate and hostile, but Zara maintained her composure. "Your Honor, I'm testifying about Sergeant Washington's character and reliability based on my direct observation of his performance under combat conditions." "I see," Whitfield replied, his voice dripping with condescension. "And you believe that makes you an expert on workplace behavior in civilian environments?" Defense attorney Martinez started to object, but Whitfield cut her off. "The witness will answer the question." Zara took a breath, recognizing the hostile environment, but committed to completing her testimony for Malik's sake. "Your Honor, I believe my experience leading teams in life-or-death situations provides relevant insight into someone's character, judgment, and ability to function under pressure." This response seemed to infuriate Whitfield even more. He leaned forward, his face reddening. "Commander, are you suggesting that your military experience makes your opinion more valuable than this court's judgment?" The question was clearly designed to provoke her, but Zara maintained her military bearing. "Not at all, Your Honor. I'm simply providing my professional assessment of Sergeant Washington's character based on our shared service experience." Officer Brett Caldwell, who had been watching the exchange from the back of the courtroom, sensed an opportunity. He had been looking for a reason to assert his authority all day, and the judge's obvious hostility toward the witness gave him an opening. Whitfield continued his inappropriate questioning, clearly trying to goad Zara into an emotional response that would justify holding her in contempt. When she refused to take the bait, maintaining her professional demeanor despite increasingly hostile treatment, Caldwell decided to intervene. "Your Honor," Caldwell called out from the back of the room, "the witness appears to be showing disrespect to the court through her attitude and demeanor." It was a completely inappropriate intervention from a security officer, but Whitfield seized on it immediately. "Thank you, Officer Caldwell. I was thinking the same thing." He turned back to Zara. "Commander, your tone and manner suggest you believe yourself above this court's authority." Zara remained calm, but firm. Your Honor, I've answered every question respectfully and truthfully. I'm here voluntarily to support a fellow veteran who served his country with honor. That response proved to be the final straw for both Whitfield and Caldwell. They had created a narrative in their minds, an arrogant military officer who thought she was better than civilian authority, and they were determined to prove their power. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Judge Whitfield's hostility escalated rapidly as he interpreted Zara's professional composure as insubordination. Commander Baptiste, I find your attitude contemptuous of this court's authority. You will modify your tone immediately. Zara maintained her military bearing, speaking clearly and respectfully. Your Honor, I apologize if my responses have been interpreted as disrespectful. That was not my intention. I'm simply trying to provide truthful testimony about Sergeant Washington's character. The courtroom had grown tense as spectators realized they were witnessing something unusual. Malik Washington sat at the defense table, his face showing growing concern for his friend. Attorney Sarah Martinez prepared to object but hesitated, unsure how to navigate the judge's obvious bias without making things worse for her client. Your apology is noted but insufficient, Whitfield declared. I'm ordering you to step down from the witness stand immediately. This court will not tolerate military personnel who believe they can intimidate civilian authority. Officer Caldwell moved forward from his position at the back of the room, his hand resting on his handcuffs. Ma'am, you need to step down now, he said, his voice carrying the tone of someone eager to escalate the situation. Zara remained seated, confused by the order but maintaining her composure. Your Honor, I'm prepared to continue my testimony if there are additional questions. I haven't completed my statement regarding Sergeant Washington's service record. This reasonable response seemed to enrage Whitfield further. He pounded his gavel repeatedly. The witness is in contempt of court for refusing to comply with direct orders and showing persistent disrespect to this court's authority. Bailiff Chuck Morrison approached the witness stand, looking uncomfortable with the situation, but following the judge's orders. Ma'am, I need you to step down and come with me. Zara stood slowly, her military training telling her to comply with lawful orders, while her instincts warned her that something was seriously wrong. I'd like to understand what law I've violated. Your Honor, I've answered all questions truthfully and respectfully. Contempt of court, disrupting proceedings, and intimidating behavior. Whitfield rattled off charges that bore no resemblance to Zara's actual conduct. Officer Caldwell placed this individual under arrest. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as spectators realized they were witnessing an unprecedented abuse of judicial power. Malik Washington started to stand, but his attorney pulled him back down, knowing that any intervention would only make things worse. Caldwell approached Zara with obvious satisfaction, pulling out his handcuffs. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Officer! I'm an active duty Navy SEAL. I'd like to understand the specific charges and contact my command before— I don't care if you're the Queen of England, Caldwell interrupted, grabbing Zara's arm roughly. You're under arrest for contempt of court and resisting lawful orders. As Caldwell forced the handcuffs onto her wrists, pulling them tighter than necessary, Zara's training kicked in. She could have easily disarmed and incapacitated both the officer and bailiff, but her discipline and respect for civilian authority prevented any physical resistance. This is highly irregular, she said calmly, even as the metal restraints bit into her wrists. I request permission to contact my commanding officer and military legal counsel. Judge Whitfield smiled coldly. Request denied. This court operates under civilian authority, not military command. You'll learn that lesson the hard way. Reporter Trinity Chen, who had been covering the discrimination case for the Norfolk Tribune, began recording on her phone as she witnessed the shocking abuse of power. She immediately sent a text message to her editor. Judge arresting Navy SEAL, witness for contempt, something major happening here. As Caldwell and Morrison began to forcibly remove Zara from the courtroom, She maintained her dignity and composure despite the humiliating treatment. But her mind was already calculating how this would play out. When word reached Admiral Blackstone and Naval Special Warfare Command, the men who thought they were demonstrating their power over military authority were about to learn exactly how much trouble they had just brought upon themselves. At Naval Special Warfare Command Headquarters, Admiral Cassandra Iron Will Blackstone was reviewing operational reports when her secure phone buzzed with an urgent message from Captain Nathaniel Hawk Reeves. The subject line read, "Immediate attention required. LTCDR Baptiste." Admiral Blackstone had commanded naval special operations for 8 years, rising through the ranks during a time when women were still fighting for the right to serve in combat roles. She was the first female officer to reach flag rank in naval special warfare, and she hadn't gotten there by accepting injustice quietly. The message contained a link to a video that Trinity Chen had already posted online, showing Zara being handcuffed and removed from the courtroom. Within minutes, the hashtag #Navy SEAL arrested was trending across military social media networks. Blackstone immediately placed calls to 3 critical contacts: the Judge Advocate General's office, the Secretary of the Navy's Chief of Staff, and Attorney General Margaret Vale's office. Each conversation was brief, professional, and set powerful wheels in motion that would converge on Richmond Heights within hours. "Captain Reeves," she called to her aide, "prep my dress whites. We're going to Richmond Heights, and get me everything we have on Judge Harrison Whitfield and Officer Brett Caldwell." While Admiral Blackstone prepared to respond with the full authority of Naval Special Warfare Command, the video of Zara's arrest was spreading like wildfire through military communities worldwide. Master Chief Sienna Venom Cross, who had served with Zara on 2 deployments, immediately called an emergency meeting of the SEAL Alumni Network. They arrested Phoenix for testifying as a character witness, Cross told the assembled group of current and former SEALs. "This isn't about one rogue judge or one bad cop. This is an attack on all of us." The response was immediate and coordinated. Within 2 hours, current and former Navy SEALs began converging on Richmond Heights from bases across the East Coast. They weren't coming to cause trouble. They were coming to ensure that one of their own received the justice she deserved. Meanwhile, Attorney Vanessa Sterling received a call from Admiral Blackstone requesting immediate legal representation for Zara. Sterling, who specialized in military civil rights cases, had been waiting years for a case this clear-cut. A decorated Navy SEAL arrested for contempt of court while providing character testimony. It was every civil rights attorney's dream case. "Admiral, he'll be on the road to Richmond Heights within the hour," Sterling assured her. "Judge Whitfield has no idea what he's unleashed." Back at the courthouse, Judge Whitfield was feeling quite pleased with himself as he recessed court for the day. In his mind, he had successfully put an arrogant military officer in her place and demonstrated that civilian authority ruled in his courtroom. He had no idea that his actions had just triggered responses from the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. Officer Caldwell was equally satisfied as he processed Zara's arrest paperwork, making sure to describe her as belligerent and uncooperative, despite video evidence to the contrary. He looked forward to telling his colleagues about how he'd brought down a hotshot Navy SEAL who thought she was above the law. Neither man had bothered to research Zara's actual service record. If they had, they would have discovered that Lieutenant Commander Zara Baptiste was not just any Navy SEAL. She was the recipient of the Silver Star for leading a hostage rescue mission that saved 12 American contractors in Syria. She had been personally decorated by the Secretary of Defense for valor under fire. She was a poster child for military excellence and had been featured in recruitment campaigns highlighting the success of women in combat roles. More importantly, she was under the direct protection of Admiral Blackstone, who had mentored her throughout her career and considered her attack on Zara to be a personal affront to Naval Special Warfare Command, the courthouse detention facility where Zara was being held had processed hundreds of routine contempt cases over the years. But they had never hosted a Navy SEAL whose arrest had triggered emergency responses from the Pentagon, the Justice Department, and the Secretary of the Navy's office, as word spread through military channels. Retired Admiral Franklin Pierce, who now served as a federal district judge, began making calls to his contacts in the Virginia judicial system. Pierce had served as Zara's mentor during her early career and was furious about her treatment. "Harrison Whitfield has always been a problem," Pierce told his clerk. "But arresting a Navy SEAL for providing character testimony, he's finally gone too far." The convergence of military leadership, federal authority, and media attention was creating a perfect storm that would soon engulf Judge Whitfield's courthouse. But for now, he remained blissfully unaware that he had just made the worst mistake of his career. The Richmond Heights courthouse had never seen anything like the coordinated response that began mobilizing within hours of Zara's arrest. Admiral Blackstone didn't just react emotionally. She orchestrated a methodical dismantling of the injustice with military precision. Her first strategic move was contacting Senator Patricia Morrison, chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, who happened to be a former Navy officer herself. Morrison immediately understood the implications of a federal judge arresting a decorated Navy SEAL for providing testimony. "Admiral, this isn't just about Commander Baptiste," Morrison said during their secure call. "This is about whether military personnel can participate in civilian legal proceedings without fear of retaliation. I'm calling for immediate congressional oversight." Simultaneously, Admiral Blackstone coordinated with the Judge Advocate General to file federal civil rights violation complaints against both Judge Whitfield and Officer Caldwell. Unlike civilian complaints, military legal challenges carried the full weight of federal authority and couldn't be dismissed through local political connections. Attorney Vanessa Sterling arrived in Richmond Heights with a team of federal civil rights lawyers and immediately filed for emergency habeas corpus relief in federal court. But more importantly, she requested an immediate investigation by the Judicial Conduct Commission. Knowing that Judge Whitfield's actions had violated multiple canons of judicial ethics, the media response was equally swift and devastating. Trinity Chen's video had been picked up by national news outlets within hours, with military affairs correspondents recognizing the significance of the story. CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC all sent crews to Richmond Heights, transforming the sleepy courthouse into the center of a national controversy. Master Chief Cross coordinated the unofficial SEAL response, ensuring that current and former team members arrived in dress uniform to demonstrate solidarity without creating security concerns. Their presence sent a clear message: the Navy SEAL community protects its own. "We're not here to intimidate anyone," Cross told the assembled SEALs. "We're here to ensure justice is served and that Phoenix gets the respect she's earned through her service." The response reached international levels when Admiral Blackstone received a call from General Sir Richard Barton, Britain's Director of Special Forces, who had worked with Zara during joint operations in Afghanistan. British, Canadian, and Australian special operations leaders issued a joint statement expressing concern about the treatment of Allied special operations personnel. By evening, Judge Whitfield began receiving calls from the State Judicial Administration, the Attorney General's office, and eventually the Governor's Chief of Staff. Each conversation made it increasingly clear that his actions had created a crisis that extended far beyond his courtroom. Officer Caldwell found himself reassigned to administrative duties pending. Investigation after video analysis showed he had lied in his arrest report about Zara's behavior. The Richmond Heights police chief, realizing the department faced potential federal investigation, immediately distanced himself from Caldwell's actions. The most significant development came when Federal District Judge Catherine Sterling, no relation to attorney, Vanessa Sterling agreed to an emergency hearing on Zara's detention. Judge Sterling, a former military officer herself, had reviewed the video evidence and determined that the arrest appeared to violate multiple constitutional protections. The arrest of a military witness providing court-ordered testimony raises serious questions about judicial misconduct and civil rights violations. Judge Sterling stated in her preliminary order, "This court will convene an emergency hearing tomorrow morning." As night fell on Richmond Heights, the small courthouse community realized they were at the center of a national controversy that would have lasting implications for military-civilian relations and judicial accountability. The local power structure that had operated without oversight for decades was about to face scrutiny from the highest levels of federal authority. Judge Whitfield, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake, spent the evening frantically calling political contacts and trying to find a way to minimize the damage. But Admiral Blackstone had been thorough in her response, and there were no political fixes available for constitutional violations committed. In full view of recording devices, the stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape the relationship between military service members and civilian courts across the country. The emergency hearing, scheduled for 9 a.m., brought unprecedented attention to the Richmond Heights courthouse. Media trucks lined the streets. Military personnel in dress uniforms maintained respectful vigil outside, and federal officials arrived in unmarked government vehicles. Judge Catherine Sterling's federal courtroom was packed as she called the emergency habeas corpus hearing to order. Attorney Vanessa Sterling represented Zara, while the state was forced to send Assistant Attorney General Michael Torres to defend what was increasingly seen as an indefensible position. "Your Honor," Vanessa Sterling began, "Lieutenant Commander Baptiste was arrested for contempt of court while providing character testimony for a fellow veteran. Video evidence shows she was respectful, professional, and complied with all lawful orders. Her only crime appears to be wearing her military uniform with dignity." Judge Catherine Sterling had reviewed all available evidence, including multiple video recordings from spectators' phones. "Counselor Torres, please explain to this court how providing truthful testimony in a respectful manner constitutes contempt of court." Torres, clearly uncomfortable with his position, attempted to defend the state's case. "Your Honor, Judge Whitfield has broad discretion in maintaining order in his courtroom. If he felt the witness was being disrespectful—" "Mr. Torres," Judge Sterling interrupted, "I've reviewed multiple video recordings of the incident. At no point did Commander Baptiste show anything approaching disrespectful behavior. In fact, she maintained exemplary composure, while being subjected to what appears to be judicial harassment. The moment everyone had been waiting for came when the courtroom doors opened and Admiral Blackstone entered with Captain Reeves and Master Chief Cross. Their presence transformed the atmosphere immediately, as even Federal Judge Sterling stood to acknowledge their rank. "Admiral Blackstone," Judge Sterling said respectfully, "thank you for coming. I believe your testimony regarding Commander Baptiste's character and service record would be valuable to these proceedings." Admiral Blackstone approached the witness stand with commanding presence. At 54, she was a legend in military circles, the first woman to achieve flag rank in naval special warfare and a champion of women in combat roles. "Your Honor, Lieutenant Commander Baptiste is one of the most decorated and professional officers I have ever commanded," Admiral Blackstone testified. "She has led direct action missions in 3 combat zones, saved countless American lives, and has never once violated military discipline or civilian law." She turned to look directly at Assistant Attorney General Torres. "The idea that she would show contempt to any court is absurd to anyone who knows her record of service and sacrifice." The Admiral's testimony was devastating to the state's case, but her next revelation changed everything. "Your Honor, I should also inform this court that Commander Baptiste was testifying yesterday as part of her official duties. The Navy had assigned her to provide character testimony for Sergeant Washington as part of our veteran advocacy program. This revelation hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Zara hadn't just been arrested as a private citizen. She had been arrested while carrying out official military duties. Furthermore, Admiral Blackstone continued, the Navy has conducted its own investigation into yesterday's events. We have determined that Judge Whitfield's actions constitute interference with military operations and potentially violate the Posse Comitatus Act by using civilian law enforcement to detain military personnel performing official duties. Judge Sterling asked for a brief recess to review this new information. When court reconvened, her ruling was swift and decisive. This court finds that Commander Baptiste's detention was without legal justification and violated her constitutional rights. All charges are dismissed immediately, and she is ordered released forthwith. But Admiral Blackstone wasn't finished. As Zara was officially released and her handcuffs removed, the Admiral announced her next step. Your Honor, Naval Special Warfare Command will be filing formal complaints with the Judicial Conduct Commission regarding Judge Whitfield's behavior, and we are requesting a Department of Justice investigation into civil rights violations by both Judge Whitfield and Officer Caldwell. The power shift was complete. What had begun as Judge Whitfield's attempt to humiliate a military witness had become a federal case that would likely end both his career and officer. Caldwell's, the men who had thought they were demonstrating their authority over military personnel, had instead triggered their own downfall. As Admiral Blackstone and Zara left the federal courthouse together, reporters captured the image that would define the story: a Navy SEAL admiral walking beside her vindicated subordinate, both in dress uniform, representing the military's commitment to protecting its own against injustice. Within 48 hours of Zara's vindication, the fallout from the Richmond Heights incident cascaded through multiple levels of government and military leadership. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened a formal investigation into the systematic patterns of behavior in Judge Whitfield's courtroom, uncovering a troubling history of bias against military personnel and minorities. Federal investigators discovered that Judge Whitfield had dismissed veteran testimony in 17 previous cases, often making disparaging comments about military attitude and warrior mentality. His pattern of hostility toward service members had gone unchallenged. Because most of his victims lacked the resources or connections to fight back effectively, the Judicial Conduct Commission's investigation revealed even more damaging evidence. Court stenographers, speaking under immunity, testified about Whitfield's private comments referring to military personnel as government-trained killers and expressing concern about their potential for violence. These statements, combined with his courtroom behavior, painted a picture of systematic prejudice. Officer Brett Caldwell faced immediate suspension without pay pending federal civil rights charges. The FBI investigation into his conduct revealed a pattern of excessive force incidents involving veterans and minorities, with most complaints being buried through departmental administrative processes. More significantly, Richmond Heights Police Chief Alexander Romano was forced to implement comprehensive reforms after federal investigators found evidence of systematic discrimination in arrest patterns and use of force incidents. The consent decree required external oversight, bias training, and complete transparency in police interactions with military personnel. The media coverage had international implications. Military allies expressed concern about the treatment of American special operations personnel, with several NATO countries formally inquiring about protections for their own personnel serving on exchange programs in the United States. Senator Morrison's Armed Services Committee announced congressional hearings on military-civilian legal relations, with Admiral Blackstone scheduled as the lead witness. The hearings would examine whether federal legislation was needed to protect military personnel participating in civilian legal proceedings. Attorney Vanessa. Sterling filed a comprehensive federal civil rights lawsuit against Judge Whitfield, Officer Caldwell, and the city of Richmond Heights. The lawsuit sought not only financial damages but systematic reforms to prevent similar incidents across Virginia's court system. This case represents a fundamental test of whether military personnel can participate in civilian society without fear of retaliation for their service, Sterling explained during a press conference. The systematic abuse we've uncovered suggests this is not an isolated incident. The ripple effects extended throughout Virginia's judicial system as other judges reviewed their own practices regarding military witnesses and personnel. Several judges quietly implemented new protocols for respectful treatment of service members after witnessing Whitfield's career destruction. Admiral Blackstone used the incident to push through long-delayed military personnel protection legislation, working directly with congressional leadership to ensure that service members would have federal recourse against judicial misconduct. What happened to Commander Baptiste could have happened to any of our personnel. Admiral Blackstone testified before Congress. We cannot allow civilian prejudice against military service to undermine the rule of law or discourage our people from participating in civic duties. The Pentagon implemented new protocols requiring immediate notification of flag officers when military personnel were detained during civilian legal proceedings. Additionally, every military installation in the United States received briefings on service member rights in civilian courts. Judge Whitfield's judicial career ended in disgrace when the Virginia Supreme Court accepted his forced resignation rather than proceeding with formal removal proceedings. At 61, his pension was reduced, and he faced potential criminal charges for civil rights violations under color of law. Officer Caldwell was terminated from the Richmond Heights Police Department and faced federal charges that could result in 5 years in prison. His career in law enforcement was over, and he became a cautionary tale about the consequences of abusing authority against military personnel. The transformation of Richmond Heights from a place where military personnel were targeted to a model for military-civilian cooperation demonstrated how quickly systematic change could occur when federal authority was applied strategically and comprehensively. Most importantly, the incident created lasting protections for military personnel nationwide, ensuring that Zara's ordeal would prevent similar injustices against countless other service members. 6 months after her wrongful arrest, Lieutenant Commander Zara Baptiste stood before a packed auditorium at the Pentagon, delivering the keynote address for military justice. Awareness Month. Her transformation from victim to advocate had captured national attention and inspired comprehensive reforms in military-civilian legal relations. 6 months ago, I was handcuffed in a courtroom for the crime of testifying while wearing my uniform with pride, she began, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium. Today, we've created protections that ensure no other service member will face that humiliation. The legal consequences for her attackers had been swift and comprehensive. Judge Whitfield faced federal civil rights charges and had been barred from ever serving in any judicial capacity. His case became a landmark precedent for holding judges accountable when they abuse their authority. Against military personnel, Officer Caldwell received a 5-year federal sentence for violating civil rights under color of law. More importantly, his case led to mandatory training programs for law enforcement agencies nationwide on appropriate interaction with military personnel. The systemic changes extended far beyond individual punishment. Congress passed the Military Personnel Protection Act, providing federal legal recourse for service members facing discrimination in civilian courts. The legislation, championed by Senator Morrison and supported by Admiral Blackstone's testimony, created dedicated federal prosecutors for military discrimination cases. Zara found her calling as the Pentagon's first director of military-civilian legal relations, a position created specifically to prevent similar incidents and ensure military personnel could participate fully in civilian legal proceedings without fear of retaliation. "What happened to me was wrong," Zara explained to the Pentagon audience. "But what we've built from that injustice will protect every service member who comes after us. That makes every moment of humiliation worth it." Admiral Blackstone, who had been promoted to Deputy Chief of Naval Operations following her exemplary handling of the crisis, introduced new Navy-wide protocols for supporting personnel involved in civilian legal matters. The Blackstone Protocol became the standard for all military branches. "We protect our own," Admiral Blackstone told the gathering, "not through intimidation or retaliation, but through the systematic application of justice and the rule of law." Commander Baptiste's case proves that approach works. The transformation of Richmond Heights had been remarkable. New Police Chief Maria Santos, a former military police officer, implemented comprehensive reforms that made the department a national model for military-civilian cooperation. Veterans now served as community liaisons, and discrimination complaints dropped to zero within 6 months. Judge Catherine Sterling, who had presided over Zara's vindication, was appointed to head a federal task force on judicial accountability. Her work led to mandatory bias training for all federal and state judges and created mechanisms for immediate review of questionable judicial conduct. Attorney Vanessa Sterling established the Military Justice Foundation, using proceeds from the federal civil rights settlement. The foundation provided free legal representation for service members facing discrimination, and had already handled over 200 cases nationwide. Zara's case opened doors that had been closed to military personnel for decades. Sterling explained during a legal symposium, "Now we have the tools and precedents to ensure equal justice under law actually means equal justice." Master Chief Cross, inspired by the community response to Zara's case, created the SEAL Support Network, a formal organization providing assistance to current and former special operations personnel facing legal or personal challenges. The network had chapters at every major military installation. "We always said we'd leave no one behind on the battlefield," Cross told network volunteers. Phoenix's case taught us that philosophy has to extend to the courtroom and the community as well. The international impact was equally significant. NATO countries implemented formal protocols protecting American military personnel in their court systems, while the United States reciprocated with enhanced protections for Allied military personnel. For Zara personally, the experience had been transformative. The shy, focused SEAL who had simply wanted to help a fellow veteran had become a national advocate for military rights and judicial accountability. "I'm still the same person who earned her, trident through sacrifice and dedication," she reflected during an interview with Trinity Chen, the reporter who had first documented her arrest. "But now I understand that serving our country doesn't end when we take off the uniform. Sometimes the most important battles are fought in courtrooms and communities." The incident had also strengthened the bond between Zara and Admiral Blackstone, who had become not just a commanding officer, but a mentor and advocate. Their partnership in reforming military-civilian relations demonstrated how leadership and loyalty could create lasting positive change. Phoenix taught all of us that individual courage can spark systematic transformation. Admiral Blackstone noted during her promotion ceremony, her willingness to stand up for justice, even when she was the one being victimized, exemplifies the best of military values. The case had broader implications for military culture as well. The swift, coordinated response to Zara's arrest became a model for how military leadership could address discrimination while respecting civilian authority. It proved that justice and military discipline were not opposing forces but complementary values. 2 years after the Richmond Heights incident, The courthouse, that had once been a symbol of judicial abuse, had been transformed into a national model for military-civilian cooperation. A bronze plaque in the lobby commemorated the reforms instituted following Zara's wrongful arrest, serving as a permanent reminder of the importance of judicial accountability. Lieutenant Commander Zara Baptiste returned to Richmond Heights for the dedication ceremony, now wearing the ribbons of the Defense Superior Service Medal and the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal for her advocacy work. Standing beside her were Admiral Blackstone, Attorney Sterling, and dozens of service members whose cases had been successfully resolved through the protections she had helped create. 2 years ago, I was handcuffed in this building for the crime of serving my country with pride, Zara addressed the assembled crowd from the courthouse steps. Today, we dedicate these reforms to ensure that no service member will ever face that injustice again. The ceremony was attended by Judge Catherine Sterling, who had overseen Zara's vindication and now chaired the Federal Judicial Accountability Commission. The commission, created in response to the Richmond Heights case, had investigated over 300 complaints of judicial misconduct nationwide and implemented reforms that strengthened protections for all courtroom participants. The Baptiste case demonstrated that accountability is not the enemy of judicial independence. Judge Sterling explained to the gathering, "It is the foundation upon which public trust in our courts must be built." Malik Washington, whose character witness testimony had started the entire chain of events, spoke about how Zara's sacrifice had not only vindicated him, but had created protections for thousands of other veterans facing discrimination in civilian courts. "Commander, Baptiste stood up for me when I couldn't. Stand up for myself," Washington said, his voice carrying emotion. "But she didn't just help one veteran. She helped all of us who wear or wore the uniform." The Richmond Heights Police Department, now led by Chief Santos and serving as a national model for community military relations, had seen crime rates drop significantly while community trust reached historic highs. The transformation proved that accountability and effective policing were not mutually exclusive. Admiral Blackstone, now serving as the Navy's Vice Chief of Operations, used her keynote address to reflect on the broader lessons of the case. "The chain of command works both ways," she told the audience. "We have a responsibility to protect those who serve under us, just as they have a responsibility to serve with honor." The international impact continued to resonate as well. NATO had established formal protocols for protecting military personnel in civilian legal proceedings, while several countries had adopted legislation modeled on America's Military Personnel Protection Act. Trinity Chen, whose initial reporting had brought national attention to Zara's case, was recognized with a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative series on military discrimination in civilian courts. Her work had exposed similar patterns in 12 states and led to comprehensive reforms nationwide. "Commander Baptiste's courage made my reporting possible," Chen acknowledged during her acceptance speech. "But more importantly, her willingness to transform personal injustice into systematic change has protected countless others who might never know her name." The Military Justice Foundation, established with proceeds from the federal settlement, had grown into a nationwide organization with offices in every state. The foundation had successfully represented over 2,500 service members and veterans in discrimination cases, with the success rate exceeding 90%. Attorney Vanessa Sterling, now the foundation's executive director, reflected on how one case had created lasting change across multiple institutions. "Zara's arrest lasted 3 hours," Sterling noted, "but the reforms it generated will protect military personnel for generations." As the ceremony concluded, Zara took a moment to visit the courthouse detention facility where she had been held 2 years earlier. The facility now displayed the Military Bill of Rights, ensuring that any service member detained in civilian custody understood their protections and had immediate access to military legal counsel. "This is where it started," she reflected. standing in the cell where she had spent those difficult hours. But it's also where it will never happen again. The transformation was complete, but Zara understood that vigilance would always be required. As she prepared to return to her duties at the Pentagon, she carried with her the knowledge that individual courage, when supported by institutional commitment to justice, could create changes that extended far beyond any single case or person. Admiral Blackstone joined her for the final walk through the courthouse, both women in dress uniform, representing not just their own service, but the thousands of military personnel who now enjoyed protections that hadn't existed before Zara's ordeal. "You know," Admiral Blackstone said as they exited the building, "they thought they were humiliating you. Instead, they created a legacy that will protect our people forever." Zara smiled, adjusting the trident on her uniform one final time before stepping into the Virginia sunshine. "Sometimes the most important victories come from the battles we never wanted to fight." The case had ended, but its legacy would endure, a testament to the power of courage, the importance of accountability, and the unbreakable bonds that unite those who serve their country with honor. In courtrooms across America, military personnel could now participate in civilian legal proceedings with confidence, knowing that their service would be respected and their rights protected. The Richmond Heights courthouse, once a symbol of injustice, had become a beacon of hope, proof that even the most entrenched systems could be reformed when individuals with courage stood up and institutions with integrity backed them up. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.